At my husband David's retirement celebration, held to honor his rehire after retirement, his former students had prepared a surprise. When an elegant older woman appeared, dressed in a chipao with her hair pinned into a bun, David grasped her hand tightly, and his eyes reddened with emotion. He said, "Julia, if back then Emma hadn't jumped into the river to save me, you wouldn't have had to leave, and we wouldn't have lost all these years." The old woman looked back at him with tears in her eyes, equally full of emotion, and I, the uninvited guest, stood on the sidelines watching as my own children and grandchildren crowded around them. They greeted the woman warmly, calling her auntie, as if they were one big happy family. Mrs. Thompson, the old woman, responded affectionately, as though they really were hers. Inside, I felt a strange, unexplainable numbness. David once said it was a mistake to let me save him back then. But how could I not regret it too? Regret that the person I saved that day was him. Outside the restaurant, one of David's former female students spotted me and looked surprised. "Ma'am, you're only just getting here?" she asked. She didn't realize that I hadn't been invited to this celebration, this special banquet held to honor David's retirement and return to work. As the server let us in and opened the banquet hall doors, we saw David surrounded at the main table by several middle-aged men, his proudest students. One of them raised his wine glass and said with a knowing smile, "Mr. Miller, to celebrate your retirement and return, we've prepared a surprise for you." As soon as he finished, the others cooperatively slid the decorative folding screen aside, revealing the surprise. When David saw the woman in the chipao, her hair in a bun, streaks of gray at her temples, yet still full of charm and grace, his eyes turned red. He walked up to her, took her hand tightly, and said, "Julia, it's really you." Julia Carter, David's first love, the woman who had lived in his heart for decades, someone even his students knew about. His one and only white moonlight. Julia's eyes were also filled with tears. She said softly, "David, if Emma hadn't jumped into the river to save me that year, you wouldn't have left me, and you wouldn't have been forced to marry her. We wouldn't have lost all these years." David continued her words, pouring out everything he had bottled up inside. Julia threw herself into his arms, sobbing like she was that 20-year-old girl again. Around them, the students burst into cheers. Even my son and grandson joined in, crowding around them and calling them uncle and auntie, as if it were all one big happy family. The female student beside me looked awkward, but I was already beyond caring. I gave a slight smile, turned, and walked away. Yes, years ago, when David came to our village as a young volunteer, it was I, Emma, who saved him when he accidentally fell into the river. Because of the gossip that spread afterward, he came to my house and proposed. What I didn't know at the time was that he and the other volunteer, Julia, had already fallen in love. After the wedding, David was always distant, never warm, never cruel, just cold. Until one day, drunk, he pointed at me and shouted that if I hadn't spread those rumors and forced him to marry me, Julia wouldn't have left in anger. At the time, I was heavily pregnant, crying as he accused me. I didn't spread those rumors, but it's true, they were spread because of me. Still, I was already carrying his child. What else could I do? From that point on, I tried everything to make it up to him. I supported him through college and graduate school. I took care of him meticulously in our daily life. Later, he became a university professor, admired by countless students. His career soared, and he grew even more confident and accomplished. Meanwhile, I wore myself down with housework, day after day. My health deteriorated. My spirit broke. Even my own son often looked at me with contempt, as if I wasn't worthy of a father as educated and refined as his. A month ago, our middle school-aged grandson was scrolling through short videos when he suddenly handed his phone to David. "Grandpa, doesn't this grandma look like the woman in that photo you keep in your drawer?" David put on his reading glasses and immediately recognized the woman in the video. It was Julia Carter, his long-lost first love, who had disappeared without a word back then. Like his father, our grandson has always idolized David. I suspect that today's carefully staged reunion, decades in the making, couldn't have happened without the scheming and help of both my son and grandson. Yes, Julia Carter is now a retired teacher and widow. She's gained internet fame for posting videos of herself in chipaos and practicing calligraphy. In my grandson's eyes, she's far more elegant and fitting for someone like David than I am. Compared to me, unkempt every day, looking at least 10 years older than my husband despite being about the same age, Julia must have seemed like the perfect match. They must have gone to great lengths, hiding everything from me and excluding me, his legal wife, their mother and grandmother, from today's banquet. Just before I left, I noticed my son saw me. His face was filled with panic, as if terrified I'd walk in and ruin the moment. But he really needn't have worried. I had no intention of doing that. I didn't come here today for David. He says he regrets being the one I saved back then. But how could I not regret that too? How could I not regret that the person I pulled from the river was him? I should have. Ma'am! Watch out! I heard the shout of that female student behind me, but faster than her voice was the misstep I took. Not watching my footing, I fell from the stairs and plunged into darkness. Help! Eric fell into the river. A cry for help, eerily familiar, echoed in my ears. I jolted awake. In front of me was a scene that had only existed in memory for years. The wild fields of our village's outskirts. I looked down at my hands, calloused, yes, but still young and glowing. I couldn't tell whether this was a dream or reality. Not until another urgent shout rang out. Only then did I finally realize I had gone back. I was reliving the day David fell into the river. Someone help! Eric can't swim. Hurry! The first time around, I'd been walking by the river when I heard the cries. I didn't hesitate. I jumped straight into the water to save him. Only after diving in did I realize that the water wasn't very deep where David had fallen. Maybe it was just that he couldn't swim. When I reached him, he clung to me like a drowning man grabbing for a lifeline. It took everything I had to drag him back to shore. That struggle in the river was seen by several villagers and young volunteers working nearby. That was what started the rumors. That single plunge into the water was the source of all my life's mistakes. Given the chance to do it over, I turned away from the cries and ran in the opposite direction. There were plenty of people near the river. Someone would save David eventually. But Eric Johnson, chopping wood in the back hills, wouldn't have that kind of luck. I ran full speed toward the forest behind the village, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would leap from my chest. Once deep in the trees, I realized I didn't actually know where Eric was. I had no choice. I searched as I ran, calling his name again and again until I heard movement in one direction. I pushed through thickets and branches toward the sound, and finally, I found him. Eric Johnson was standing shirtless, gripping an axe beside a massive tree. When he saw me, surprise spread across his sweat-drenched face. "Emma, what are you doing here?" I opened my mouth to explain, but before I could speak, I heard a loud crack from the tree behind him. My mind went blank. I remembered one line. Eric was struck by a falling tree while chopping wood in the back hills, and it broke his leg. In that split second, I screamed, "Watch out!" and lunged toward him. Eric was stunned at first, but as the massive shadow of the falling tree loomed over us, he instinctively caught me and rolled us both out of the way. The tree, rotted inside, crashed to the ground just beside us with a thunderous boom. Birds scattered in all directions. Dust flew into the air. Branches from the crown whipped through the air and scratched my skin, stinging sharply, but I didn't care. I scrambled to check on Eric's legs. "Your legs? Are your legs okay?" I exhaled in relief only when I saw both of his legs were unharmed, not pinned beneath the fallen trunk. At that moment, I couldn't stop the tears from falling. Eric panicked, thinking I was hurt. "Did you get injured?" he asked, checking me over. But I just shook my head and threw myself into his arms. David always thought I jumped into that river because I wanted something from him, that I saved him just to cling to him. That I was the one who spread the rumors in the village to force him into marrying me. But that wasn't the truth. I'll admit, David was the most handsome of that batch of young volunteers. The moment he arrived in the village, he made all the girls blush. And not long after, word spread that he'd passed the college entrance exam and gotten into a prestigious northern university. That only made him even more sought after. Matchmakers and unmarried girls swarmed around him, but I was never one of them. Sure, David had talent and looks, but my heart had always belonged to someone else. That someone was Eric Johnson, a boy from our own village. Eric had been adopted by old Mr. Johnson, the village committee head. He was a foundling, brought home by Mr. Johnson from outside the village. The two of them had relied on each other their whole lives. From elementary school, Eric and I had been classmates and seatmates for many years. In 9th grade, Mr. Johnson fell gravely ill. Eric had to drop out of school and go work outside the village to pay for his treatment. Just a few months ago, Mr. Johnson passed away, and Eric finally returned home to handle the funeral. Years of hardship had taken their toll. Eric had lost the youthful brightness he once had, but his features had grown deeper, more mature. When he saw me, he started to reach out as if to ruffle my hair the way he used to when we were in school, but halfway through, he pulled his hand back and just gave me an awkward, sheepish smile. But my heart wouldn't stop pounding. Yes, I had liked Eric Johnson for many years. When he returned to the village this time, I had made up my mind to ask him directly, ask him if he had feelings for me, ask if he would consider proposing. But that day, Emma, saved David. After catching a cold and spending a few days recovering at home, I went to look for Eric, only to find his house completely empty. I asked around the neighborhood. Only Uncle Lynn said that Eric had been taken away by a woman. People in the village began saying Eric had met a wealthy businesswoman while working outside and had been taken away to become a live-in son-in-law. Of course, I didn't believe it. But Eric hadn't even left me a note. He just disappeared without a word. Later on, gossip started spreading through the village. They said that when I saved David, he had touched my body, and I was no longer clean. If David didn't take responsibility and marry me, the incident might get reported, and he could lose his college admission. With an ugly expression, David came to my house to propose. My parents, worried about my reputation and impressed by David's status as a soon-to-be college student, agreed to the marriage. After we married, David still longed for Julia. And I never stopped feeling something unresolved toward Eric. It wasn't until the day before David's rehiring banquet that I ran into a middle-aged woman who asked if I knew someone named Eric Johnson. The moment I heard the name, I froze. She said Eric was her uncle, and the woman who had taken him away all those years ago was his older sister. She told me his family had been searching for him for a long time and had finally tracked him to our village. I asked her, if finding family was a good thing, then why did he leave without saying anything? She glanced at me, her voice tinged with sorrow. When my mom came to bring my uncle home, she said he'd already been in an accident. He told me the whole story later. That was when I learned the truth. On the day I saved David, Eric had been in the back hills cutting wood. A tree suddenly cracked and fell, crushing his legs. By the time anyone found him, it was too late. His legs had been trapped too long. They couldn't be saved. The woman said that after Eric realized his legs were ruined, he felt unworthy of me. When her mother came to take him home, he asked her to bring him away and made everyone who knew what had happened swear to keep it secret. He didn't want me to know the truth. And just like that, everything became clear. No wonder Uncle Lynn had looked so hesitant, like he had something he couldn't say, when he told me Eric had left with a woman. She added, "My uncle said, this way, you'd forget about him more easily." I gave a bitter smile. Eric really did understand me well. He knew that if I had found out about his injury, I would have done anything to stay by his side and marry him anyway. But he also didn't understand me enough. Even when I believed he had left me for another woman, I still couldn't forget him. "Where is he now?" I asked, my voice careful, full of hope. The woman gave a regretful shake of her head. "Uncle passed away last year." Tears fell instantly from my eyes, especially when she told me that Eric had never married in his lifetime. The only reason I showed up at that restaurant was because she told me Eric had left behind some things, and if I wanted them, she could give them to me. So we arranged to meet. Eric had left behind a small box. Inside were ordinary things, little knickknacks I had fiddled with back when we were in school. At the bottom of the box was a photo of me, the one I had forced into his hand the day he came back from working out of town. Back then, he hadn't even asked why I gave him the photo. He had just grinned and said, "Emma, you look so beautiful in this, you really do." What a fool he was. Emma, are you okay?" Eric's voice jolted me out of my memories. I looked up and met his worried gaze. I wiped my tears and shook my head to say I was fine. Eric stood up first and reached out his hand to me. I grabbed his arm, ready to stand, but the moment I shifted, pain shot through my ankle. With a yelp, I fell back down. Eric quickly crouched beside me to check my injury. "Looks like it's twisted," he said, gently holding my ankle, brows furrowed in concern. "I'll take you to the village clinic to have it looked at," Eric said. Then he turned around and lowered his broad back in front of me. I didn't hesitate. I reached up and wrapped my arms around his neck. On the way down the mountain, I asked him why he had come to the back hills to chop wood. He was quiet for a long time before finally answering. He said he wanted to gather some firewood to sell in town while he wasn't working. "I used up all my money treating Grandpa's illness and paying for the funeral," he said. "I want to save up again. Emma, I want to go back to school. I want to take the college entrance exam." I nodded, fully supportive. "You definitely should. You were one of the top students back then, weren't you?" But Eric gently interrupted me. I was leaning against his back and clearly saw how his ears suddenly turned red. "Your dad said only a college graduate would be good enough to marry you." I was stunned. After the national college entrance exams were reinstated, several of the young volunteers in the village had gotten into university. My dad, one of the first families to welcome outside volunteers, had modernized his standards when talking about my marriage prospects. He loudly insisted that his daughter should marry a college graduate. I didn't expect that Eric had heard those words too. What a fool. Tears welled up again, and I tightened my arms around his neck. Eric carried me all the way to the village clinic. As soon as we stepped in, he called over the doctor to take a look at my injury. The doctor asked about my condition and then told me to wait a moment while he finished up with the patient ahead of me. I followed the doctor's gaze and immediately saw who was lying on the treatment bed. It was David. He was soaking wet, his face pale. When he noticed my stare, he looked back at me, eyes full of wounded reproach, as if blaming me for something. I looked away after just one glance. This time, I hadn't jumped in to save him. There was no entanglement between us. Whether he was sick, injured, or even dead, it had nothing to do with me. Eric helped me sit down on a bench nearby, then walked over to a nurse to ask for some supplies. He insisted on treating the scratches on my arm himself. Before long, the doctor finished examining David. As he got off the bed, a young woman sitting nearby instantly stood and rushed over. "Doctor, is Eric okay?" she asked. I recognized her voice immediately. It was Spring Lee, from our village. Among all the girls who had chased after David, none had been bolder or more persistent than Spring. When David worked in the fields, she was always there, offering help with a smile. In my past life, after David and I got engaged, Spring would glare at me every time she saw me in the village. Once, she even said with a sneer that if she had been the one to save him, she would have been the one marrying David. Not me. Now I watched as a trail of wet footprints formed beneath David on the clinic floor. I couldn't help but sigh. Well, I guess Spring finally got her wish. I said, "Spring, next time you save someone, you shouldn't use that much force. Good thing Eric's okay. Imagine if you'd smashed his face in." Then what? The doctor, who was prescribing medication, also scolded her. "You can't go slamming people in the chest like that." Spring rolled her eyes. "I was just worried, okay?" When I pulled him out of the water, he was limp like a corpse. I was panicking. I had to get the water out. The doctor glared at her. "You don't need to beat the water out of him with your fists." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. So David wasn't weak from drowning, he'd been pummeled by Spring. Spring shot me a sharp glare when she heard me laugh. Then she changed her tone and offered a half-hearted apology. Fine, I shouldn't have hit him so hard. But even if Eric did get hurt, it's not like I wouldn't take responsibility." As she spoke, she gave David a bashful look. His face, however, stayed just as grim as before. Eric didn't care for drama. He was focused entirely on my injury. "Doctor, can you see Emma now?" "Looks like they're about done," the doctor replied. Without hesitation, Eric scooped me up in his arms and carried me to the treatment table. As I was lifted off the bench, I instinctively tightened my grip around his neck. At that exact moment, I felt a sharp gaze pierce through the air toward us. When I turned to look, I saw David clutching his chest, walking slowly out of the clinic. Spring hesitated for a moment, grabbed the medicine he'd left behind, and chased after him. Eric, wait up. After that day, my parents locked me in the house. Part of it was so I could recover from my injury. But more than that, they didn't want me seeing Eric again. When Eric brought me home that day, my mother immediately saw what was in my heart. Though polite on the surface, she thanked Eric with a stiff formality. Eric even walked me to the door, but the moment he left and the door closed, my father's face hardened. He immediately launched into a scolding. Emma, I see you're really something now. Of all people, why did you have to set your sights on Eric Johnson? Don't you know he's an orphan with no father or mother? I mumbled under my breath, Eric isn't an orphan. His parents just haven't found him yet. And anyway, just because someone has parents doesn't mean they're any good. In my past life, even though I married David, I ended up not only supporting him through school, but also taking care of his paralyzed, bedridden mother. Even in the dead of winter, heavily pregnant, I still had to carry out the most humiliating chores for my mother-in-law. Whenever she wasn't pleased, I became her punching bag, enduring her beatings and verbal abuse. It wasn't until David eventually fell gravely ill and passed away that I was finally freed. Emma, what are you daydreaming about? My mother's sharp voice snapped me back. Are you listening to me? Seeing my distracted expression, she angrily pinched my arm. I quickly responded, I'm listening, though in my heart I was plotting how to keep them calm for now, and once my ankle healed, I would find a way to sneak out and meet Eric again. Honestly, being confined at home wasn't too boring. My younger sister would secretly bring me news from outside. She said Spring Lee was causing a scene all over the village, claiming that when she pulled David from the river, he had touched her body, and now he needed to take responsibility. Other times, she insisted she had saved David's life, and that he owed her marriage in return. The rumors about her and David were spreading like wildfire. It was just like what had happened in my previous life, except this time, it seemed that Spring was pushing the story herself. If events followed the same path as before, David would soon cave under the pressure of gossip and propose to Spring. I figured it wouldn't be long before she started handing out wedding candies in the village. Big sis, someone asked me to give this to you, my sister whispered, sneaking something into my hand when Mom wasn't looking. It was a little bamboo rabbit, handcrafted. I recognized Eric's handiwork instantly. Seeing me holding the bamboo rabbit, my sister grew curious. Sis, do you really like that guy named Johnson? Mom says he's no good and not worthy of you. I jokingly made a stern face and pretended to snatch the candy from her hand. If you think he's no good, why are you still taking his candy? Eric Johnson was far more capable than they could ever imagine. In my past life, his niece had told me that after Eric left the village, he self-studied for the college entrance exams. Not only did he get into university, he pursued his education all the way to a PhD. He eventually became a renowned academician at a prestigious scientific research institute, dedicating his life to science. His achievements were something David could never even dream of reaching. If Eric had that potential, I couldn't let him be buried here. After thinking it through, I decided I needed to find him. I wanted to tell him that if tuition was the problem, I could help. After making my sister promise to cover for me, I quietly slipped out of the house. As I passed by the riverbank, I unexpectedly saw someone sitting alone, Julia Carter. She was sitting by the river, silently wiping away tears, looking completely heartbroken. What surprised me was that, according to my memories from my past life, by this time Julia should have already been so upset over David and Spring's entanglement that she would have left the village. But now, she was still here. Curious, I walked up to her and asked, Julia, why are you crying? Without thinking, she blurted out, It's that Spring Lee, she keeps pestering David. Only after realizing what she had said did she hurriedly lift her head to try and explain. But I showed no sign of surprise. Instead, I naturally sat down beside her and joined in the conversation. You're talking about Spring and David, right? I said easily. Well, I can't really blame Spring. Guys like David aren't easy to come by. But since you and David are in a relationship, you could just say so openly. Maybe then, Spring would back off. Relationship? Julia echoed my word, then stammered. David and I aren't exactly like that. I frowned slightly. That wasn't what I had heard in my past life. David had told me himself that he and Julia had been involved for a while before he broke up with her under the pressure of the rumors, which led Julia to leave the village in anger. Seeing my skeptical look, Julia's face turned red as she quickly explained, I really do like David, and I can tell he has feelings for me too. But no matter how long Julia waited, David never gave her a clear response. She couldn't be the one to confess first. Talking about it now, Julia looked troubled. It was precisely because they hadn't made their relationship official that she had no standing to ask Spring Lee to back off from pursuing David. After hearing all this, I stayed silent. If I were still the innocent, naive girl I once was, maybe I could empathize with Julia's anxiety. But after living more than 60 years in my past life, in an era where information spread at lightning speed, I had learned a lot through the internet. David's behavior in today's terms would be called being a jerk. Why was it that what David told me in the past differed so much from what Julia was saying now? Looking at Julia's soft, gentle face, a suspicion surfaced in my heart. I carefully asked, Julia, under what circumstances would you give up on David and leave? Julia thought about it for a moment before answering. If David himself told me he was going to marry Spring Lee. But he already said he would never give in to her. That was why Julia still had hope and had stayed. I couldn't help but remember the look on David's face when he came to propose to me in my past life, full of humiliation, as if he were being forced into something he found unbearable. Now, even though Spring had made a bigger mess this time, David was saying he wouldn't give in. Wasn't he always so obsessed with his reputation? As I stewed over the inconsistencies between his past and present behavior, my younger sister suddenly came running over, gasping for breath. Big sis, Mom and Dad said to hurry home. What happened? I asked, noticing how pale she was from running. Someone's come to propose, she blurted out. What? I was shocked. I thought she meant Eric Johnson. My sister quickly waved her hands. No, it's David. What? This time, it was Julia sitting beside me who gasped, looking at me like I had just betrayed her. I felt utterly wronged, but still, I needed to head home and see for myself what David was trying to pull now. When I arrived, David was already sitting stiffly in our main room. As soon as he saw me enter, he stood up and smiled. He had clearly dressed up for the occasion, hair neatly combed, clothes tidy. If the village girls saw him like this, they'd be swooning. But I barely glanced at him before looking away. The more I looked at David, the more I remembered his words from my past life. Emma, you're the reason I was separated from Julia. You owe me. But in this life, I owed him nothing. I wasn't about to let him ruin me again. Emma, my father said seriously, his expression stern. Tell me what's going on between you and David. He looked ready to break the engagement if I so much as hinted there was something between us. Honestly, although my father was rough around the edges, he had great respect for educated men. David's college entrance exam scores had been the best among all the young volunteers, so my father should have had a good impression of him. But the scandal between David and Spring had spread all over the village. Naturally, my father had started to question his character. Facing his stern questioning, I didn't hesitate. Dad, I swear to you, I've barely spoken a few words to David. There's absolutely nothing between us. He must have come to the wrong house. I even kindly pointed David in the right direction. David, Spring's house is in the alley behind ours. When I mentioned Spring's name, David's forced smile almost cracked, but he managed to keep it together. He straightened his posture and humbly addressed my father. Uncle, although I've only had a few encounters with Emma, I've been deeply attracted to her. I know you've always wanted Emma to marry a college student, so I'd like to recommend myself. He said it with such confidence, like my father would immediately agree just because he was going to college. He puffed out his chest slightly, obviously proud of his acceptance to a northern university. In his mind, that was enough to seal the deal. Before my father could be swayed, I scoffed out loud. David, stop joking. Everyone in the village knows about you and Spring Lee. If you don't take responsibility for her, she's going to report you. Who knows if you'll even be able to start college after that? David's face twitched, but he forced himself to keep smiling. Then I'll have to trouble Uncle to mediate for me, he said, turning back to my father with a pleading look. If my father stepped in, then Springley would definitely stop making trouble. I suddenly understood what David's plan was. Ever since my father caught the wave of the times and became one of the first wealthy business owners in the village, his words carried a lot of weight. If he intervened, Springley might really quiet down. Hearing David's plea, my father actually started to seriously consider it. After all, even he had heard of the university David had been accepted into. It promised a bright future. David saw my father's hesitation and thought he saw hope. His tone turned even more ingratiating. "Uncle, don't worry. I promise I'll treat Emma well." Seeing him so humble and deferential, something I'd never witnessed in my past life, I felt a strong urge to sneer at him. But before I could say anything, another voice broke the silence. "David, if you're going to marry Emma, then what about me?" It was Julia Carter. She had been eavesdropping outside the main room, and now couldn't hold back any longer. She stormed in, tears shimmering in her eyes. The moment David saw her, panic flashed across his face. "Julia, what are you doing here?" His choice of words, switching from calling her affectionately to formally, stabbed Julia right in the heart. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What about all those essays we read together? All those dreams we talked about? Were they nothing?" He was stringing her along. I thought bitterly to myself, Julia must have been furious. From her point of view, she and David were only a breath away from making their relationship official. Dealing with Springley had already been hard enough, and now another girl, me, had popped up to complicate things. She wasn't going to let David off easily. Showing her anger, Julia declared in front of everyone that she and David had been intimate. In this era, unlike the 21st century, society was much more conservative. Even holding hands or hugging counted as a serious romantic gesture. To have gone that far without David giving her a clear commitment, no wonder in my past life she had cried so desperately when she reunited with him. It was true. The unreachable first love is the hardest to forget. Pressed by Julia's words, David's face turned even uglier. But my father's expression was even darker, black as a pot's bottom. Just as my father was about to speak, David panicked. He roughly shoved Julia away and hurriedly tried to explain. "Uncle, you have to believe me. Julia and I have nothing between us. She's the one who's been chasing after me." Julia staggered back from the force of his push. I reached out instinctively and grabbed her arm to steady her. When I looked into her eyes, I saw shock and disbelief. Tears welled up and Julia let out a sob, then turned and ran out of the house. David didn't even try to stop her. I clenched my teeth. So this was how he treated the woman he claimed to have cherished? David straightened his clothes, trying to maintain his dignity, and prepared to continue his proposal to me. But before he could speak again, someone else stormed in. A man charged straight up to David, voice booming with anger. "David, how dare you ruin my daughter's reputation and try to back out of it?" Following behind were Springley and my younger sister. I couldn't help but laugh. I had been worried David might sway my father, so I had asked my sister to bring Spring over. But I hadn't expected that Uncle Lee, Spring's father, had returned from his work outside the village. And now the real show was about to begin. Everyone in the village knew Uncle Lee was tough and stubborn as a mule. No matter how serious a matter was, he solved everything with his fists. Sure enough, he was already grabbing David's collar, ready to start swinging. Spring shouted, "Dad, don't hit him!" But her voice lacked real conviction. She didn't really want to stop it. After all, after days of being ignored and rejected by David, she must have been dying to see him get a little punishment. Just as Uncle Lee's fist was about to land square on David's face, my father finally barked out a command. "Enough!" Uncle Lee froze in mid-punch. David looked at my father like he was seeing a savior. But before he could feel relieved, my father snapped, "Get out! All of you. You think you can turn my house into a circus? Get out now." David's face drained of color instantly. Uncle Lee, however, let out a long breath of relief. Though he was stubborn, even he wasn't foolish enough to ignore my father's authority in the village. But Uncle Lee knew how to read the room. If my father had decided to protect David, Uncle Lee might have hesitated to act. Yet seeing clearly that my father wanted no part of defending David, Uncle Lee had no more reservations. He grabbed David roughly and dragged him straight out of the house. After witnessing this chaotic scene, my father's mood was thoroughly foul. He sternly warned me never to get involved with someone like David. My mother, too, chimed in, shaking her head. "Who would have thought," she said, "that someone who looks so well-mannered like David could be so rotten inside? Truly, you never know what's hidden behind a face." I took the opportunity to agree enthusiastically. Exactly. Someone we've known since they were little is way more trustworthy than some outsider. My mother caught the hidden meaning in my words and glared fiercely at me. I immediately shrank back and pretended to be meek. Later, I found a chance to sneak out and meet Eric Johnson. I handed over all the money I had managed to save. No matter what I said, Eric refused to accept it at first. I got so frustrated that I ended up yelling at him. "Eric Johnson, do you want to propose to me sooner or not? The sooner you go back to school, the sooner you can start preparing for the college entrance exam. Or do you want me to wait for you for years?" Finally, Eric relented and accepted the money. Holding my hand tightly, he solemnly promised, "Emma, I swear, I will get into college." I smiled and nodded. I knew he wouldn't disappoint me. Eric returned to town to resume classes at the local high school, while Julia Carter also left the village. Before she left, she met with me one last time. She told me that in her heart, David had always been this pure, aloof gentleman, untouched by the dust of the world. But after witnessing him grovel and deny their relationship just to win favor with my father, she realized the man she had admired was nothing but an illusion. After crying her heart out, Julia finally woke up to reality. She understood that David's behavior showed he wasn't worth her love at all. "This city girl's dream," she said bitterly, "should just be handed to Spring Lay. David isn't good enough for me anyway." Before she left, she gave me another warning. "Emma, don't let yourself get tricked by David." I shook my head, I assured her. After all, in my past life I had been completely deceived by him. But a person can't and shouldn't step into the same pile of filth twice. Still, what I hadn't expected was that even when I tried my best to avoid that pile of filth, it would come crawling toward me. One day, after shopping at the market, I was walking home when suddenly a pair of hands grabbed me from behind, covering my mouth and nose, dragging me into a deserted corner. When I finally broke free and turned around, I saw David. His face was still bruised and his head wrapped in a bandage. I remembered hearing that after Uncle Lee dragged him away that day, he'd roughed David up pretty badly, even knocking his head against something. Looking at David now, beaten up and pathetic, was honestly a little funny. But before I could even laugh, David gritted his teeth and snapped. "Emma, why didn't you save me that day? If you had jumped into the river, none of this would have happened." "And what wouldn't have happened?" I interrupted coldly. "You mean you wouldn't have gotten involved with Spring Lea? That you could have used me saving you as an excuse to spread rumors, destroy my reputation, blame me, then play the victim and come to my house to propose?" My voice sharpened. "Then later, you could have strung along your ambiguous relationship with Julia Carter, spinning a tale about how I ruined your true love story, making me live the rest of my life riddled with guilt, working like a dog for your family, while you rose to become a distinguished professor. David, you really had it all planned out, didn't you?" David's pupils trembled violently. Then his face twisted with realization. "So you've come back too," he said. "That's right." When David angrily questioned why I hadn't saved him, I had already recognized something in his eyes, an arrogance, a coldness, from decades later. That familiarity had tipped me off. That's why I had ripped the mask right off his face, piecing everything together. Everything that had happened since I woke up in this new life, I could finally reconstruct the truth behind everything after saving David in my past life. The truth was, it had all been David's carefully laid scheme. His target had always been me, or more precisely my family. After marrying David in my past life, I realized that his home had been practically destitute. His mother was paralyzed in bed, and even their house was falling apart. When the college entrance exams were reinstated, tuition could be covered through grants, but the cost of living was still a major obstacle. David needed someone who could financially support him and care for his mother at the same time. And my family was the perfect target. a wealthy farming household with some money, easier to manipulate than a city family. That's why David never seriously considered Springley, because her family wasn't worth anything in his eyes. At the same time, David had been dragging things out with Julia Carter, refusing to make their relationship clear. Deep down, he knew her family probably wouldn't approve of their relationship, and more importantly, neither Julia nor her family would willingly serve his bedridden mother for the rest of her life. The spot where David had fallen into the river was somewhere I passed by every day. Thinking back now, even the way he had flailed in the water felt suspiciously deliberate. He had used the village gossip to pressure my parents into accepting his marriage proposal, then used Julia's constant presence to pile guilt on me, all while enjoying the benefits of my selfless devotion without a shred of conscience. David was pure scum. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, how had a rat like him been reborn too? If fate truly had eyes, it would have left him rotting where he deserved. Thankfully, David didn't disappoint. His face darkened as he said that during the rehiring banquet, he had left midway to go to the restroom, and at that moment, a fire broke out at the restaurant. Everyone else had escaped, but for some reason, he couldn't open the bathroom stall door, and was eventually choked to death by the smoke. I laughed out loud, tears nearly streaming down my face, though even that didn't feel like enough to vent my anger. Compared to the decades of suffering I had endured, his death had been far too easy. But David wasn't finished. "It's okay, Emma," he said. "I'm back now, we can start over. This time, I'll treat you well, as long as you help me get rid of Springley's family." As he spoke, he grabbed my arm, trying to pull me into his embrace. I swung around and slapped him hard across the face. "Keep dreaming, you disgusting bastard," I spat. Last life, it was my stupidity that let him run circles around me. What made him think he could fool me again in this life? Just because of his thick skin? My slap hit so hard his head snapped to the side. David spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the ground, then turned back, his eyes bloodshot with rage. "Don't you want Wenjin and Xuanxuan to be born?" he hissed. "You loved them so much. Wenjin was our son, Xuanxuan, our grandson." But hearing their names now only stoked my fury. I thought of how, in my past life, I had poured my whole heart into raising them, only to be repaid with cold indifference and betrayal. I let out a cold laugh and aimed a brutal kick at David's groin. Unfortunately, he reacted fast enough to dodge, sidestepping in panic. He had clearly seen the murderous intent behind my kick and couldn't help but tremble afterward. How can you treat me like this?" he shouted, disbelief written all over his face. "I'm your husband. You're supposed to love me." I spat at him. "Love you? Over my dead body?" Last life, I might have loved him. But in this life, there was nothing left but disgust. No, this can't be." David's expression twisted even further. I could see desperation in his bloodshot eyes. He was slipping into madness. "As long as you're mine," he said crazily, "everything will be like before. I'll finish college, get my graduate degree, become the youngest university professor, and once you're mine, your parents will have no choice but to let us marry." As he spoke, he suddenly lunged forward, pinning me against the wall and trying to tear at my clothes. I struggled with all my strength, screaming at the top of my lungs for help. David tried to cover my mouth, but I managed to catch the right moment and bit down hard on his hand. He cried out in pain and staggered back, right into someone else. Before he could react, the newcomer grabbed the back of David's collar and flung him aside. "Eric Johnson!" I cried out in joy. Eric rushed to my side in just a few steps, his face full of worry. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. I was about to shake my head when I saw David, furious and trembling, pick up a stick from the ground and charge at Eric. "Watch out!" I shouted. Eric spun around just in time, grabbing the stick mid-swing. With one swift kick, he sent David flying backward. David's frail body couldn't withstand the strength Eric had built through years of hard labor. With a groan, David collapsed and couldn't get up again. At that moment, villagers who had heard the commotion started rushing over. Seizing the opportunity, I dramatically threw myself onto the ground and began wailing loudly. "Everyone, help me! David tried to assault me." More and more people gathered, pointing at David and whispering angrily. I doubted David had ever been humiliated like this, not even once in 2 lifetimes. Overwhelmed by rage and shame, he let out a final shudder, his eyes rolling back, then fainted dead away. Eric Johnson had only rushed back from town to the village to tell me that his family had finally found him. He hadn't expected to hear my cries for help on the way to my house. Thanks to his introduction, I met the woman who had taken him away in my past life, his older sister. Eric brought her to my home, and my parents looked visibly uneasy in front of this poised, elegant woman with a clearly distinguished background. But even so, they refused to budge on the matter of my marriage. I already said, my father declared, if I promised my daughter would marry a college graduate, then I'm going to stick to that. He glanced at Eric, who stood nervously before him and gave a few awkward coughs. If you can get into college, I'll consider approving your relationship with Emma. Thank you, sir. I promise I won't let you down. Eric's voice trembled with excitement. I was so thrilled I nearly threw myself into his arms, only to be yanked back by my father. Look at you. No shame at all. Can't you act a little more proper? He barked, clearly exasperated. I pouted a little, but suddenly remembered something else. Dad, I want to write a formal complaint. My letter of accusation resulted in David losing his university admission. When the news came through, I made a point to go see David's reaction myself. The look on his face, like he'd just been struck by lightning, was immensely satisfying. David, red-eyed, looked like he was about to confront me, but Spring Lee grabbed him before he could speak. You're the one who forced me to register the marriage license with you. David didn't even have time to deny it before Spring smacked him across the face. Still trying to talk back? Do you know how awful your reputation is now? Who else would even want to marry you besides me? Do you think you're still that high and mighty David Chen? She jabbed a finger at him. If you don't get into college and give me the life I want, I'll have my dad beat the crap out of you. I turned and walked away, leaving their chaos behind me. David was no longer part of my world. When the college entrance exams rolled around again the following year, Eric really did score high enough to get into a prestigious university. When he came to propose, the sound of firecrackers exploding outside my front door drowned out the noise of arguments still happening in the Lai household next door. I heard that David, forced by Spring to retake the exam, had scored miserably again. After years of repeated failures, his mental state completely collapsed. He became deranged, going around telling everyone he was a graduate student and a university professor. But all it earned him were looks of pity and disgust. Even Spring Lee couldn't take it anymore. She divorced him. But in this life, Eric Johnson, with a healthy body and sharp mind, went on to achieve even greater things in scientific research. When he won the Global Award for Outstanding Scientists, I stood with our child in the audience, applauding with tears in my eyes. At the end of his acceptance speech, Eric asked the cameras to turn toward me. He said, "The person I'm most grateful for in this life is my wife, Emma. She's the one who's always stood beside me, supporting me as I walk this path in science. I don't have fancy words, but I just want to say, Emma, I love you, with all my heart, in this life and the next." Thunderous applause erupted, and I, smiling through my tears, looked back at him, grateful, fulfilled, and deeply, truly happy.